Street Fighter is one of the most iconic gaming series in history, so it's not surprising to see Sony and Capcom announce a movie adaptation set to release in 2026. Yet, this movie won't be its first big screen adaptation, with two movie releases in the same year in 1994. One animated produced in Japan by Group Taku, and another live-action adaptation distributed by Universal and Sony Pictures. Both were commercially successful, yet they were met with distinctly different critical and audience reactions, with the animated movie well received and having an influence on the visual style of subsequent games, TV shows and movies, and the live action more derided and at best considered the type of movie that's so bad it's good. So with such a difference in audience reaction, it's now time for a deconstruction to remind Sony and Capcom that the next movie needs to add to the lore of Street Fighter rather than cash in on it for a quick buck. So let's get started with a plot summary of each movie before we compare them in a deconstruction. The plots on the face of it are quite similar. Both have Bison as a threat to world order, with Street Fighters like Ryu, Ken and Guile tasked with tracking him down and defeating him to save the day. Yet the animated movie takes a broader geopolitical perspective, with Interpol leading the search and Bison recruiting Street Fighters to hypnotize them with his psycho power to become political assassins, while the live-action movie focuses more on a single hostage rescue in Shadaloo City, where Bison is ransoming them for $20 billion. Either way, Bison is the guy they need to track down and take out. Okay, so far so similar, but how do the movies compare in the experience they deliver within the framework of their respective plots? With a title with the word fighter, you would be forgiven for expecting fights would be central to both movies, but alas no, with the animated movie having 15 scenes with fights as the primary focus to live action's paltry 8. But more than the number of fights, this visualization shows the animated movie includes more intricate and choreographed fights, with the size of the bubbles representing the number of hits landed on an opponent. Here we see animated generally has more hits per fight, and the fights are more spaced out, acting like a heartbeat of the story, while in live action most of the fighting is left for the end finale. And back to animated's heartbeat of fights, we see a clear signal of intent from the opening scene with Ryu and Sagat as to how the filmmakers wanted to treat them and their meaning to the narrative. This opening scene is a fight 5 minutes long without a single word of dialogue, yet the combat and blows tell us everything we need to know, with Ryu taking on the world champion of Sagat, a physically more dominant opponent, against the backdrop of a lightning storm. Sagat at first takes the upper hand, but Ryu uses his strength, determination and skill to beat his larger, more experienced opponent, with the final blow coming from an iconic Hadoken. And the Hadoken itself is shown in a way that makes us better understand how Ryu summons it, generating energy in the air around him before unleashing it to finish off Sagat. Compare this to the first fight with Ken and Ryu in live action, which is more like a common brawl against Sagat's gang than a fight of world warriors, and the first and only Hadoken from Ryu later in the movie is more a burst of air than a ball of electrical energy. And let's remember, this is the decade that brought us Terminator 2 and The Matrix. Are you telling me there was no way to bring the Hadoken more to life? But I guess when you've cut Van Damme his check, there's not much left for the effects department. And this lack of investment in the Hadoken effects extends more generally to the special move use across the movies, with animated using more than twice the number of live action and near all the special moves in live action squeezed into the end finale fight, rather than more spread out across the scenes of narrative consequence in animated. And this point brings us to the fight scene in animated that takes the most time and has the most hits. Now, you'd be forgiven for assuming the fight I'm referencing involves Ryu or Ken, but you'd be wrong. Instead, it's Vega's attack on Chun-Li, and in this fight we see a sequence of blows and interactions that represents what the animated movie wants to be and how it wants to contribute to the lore of Street Fighter. In this scene we see Chun-Li taking a shower and she's attacked by Vega, but she isn't just attacked, she's taunted and played with by Vega, and as he goes in for the kill she fights back, not just through blows but in hitting him where she knows it will hurt him the most, twisting his prized face, which triggers an uncontrolled rage in Vega, allowing her to use her skill and sheer willpower to beat him, with some of the best acrobatic fight choreography we see in any Street Fighter movie or show. And the heavy metal sound soundtrack this fight plays out against is fantastic. It really contributes to the intensity of the fight and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up when I first watched it. I've put a link in the description if you want to check it out. And the use of the special moves with the spinning bird kick and lightning kick really means something. They have a purpose, a meaning, and a consequence for Chun-Li to finish Vega off, rather than Ryu's puff of air Hadouken and Ken's excuse of a Shuriken. And it's this meaningful purpose in the fights that extends to characterization in the animated movie, while the live-action adaptation takes more of a one-liner and gag-based approach, with Ryu emblematic of this difference. As the accepted mascot of the game series, it's not surprising he's used extensively in both movies, with a similar 53% of runtime featuring him in animated and 55% in live action. But it's in how he's used that sets the movies apart. For a start, he's more of a solo and lone character in animated, with 40% of his screen time without Ken, whereas in live action he's with Ken either on screen or in the same sequence of shots 100% of the time. In animated, he's a lone wolf wandering the earth, honing his skills by observing and taking in fights across the world, and when he does fight, it's often because he gets in the middle of events, like when Fei Long challenges him, or when he takes out the Shadow Law assassins when he's walking through a city. And it's this stoicism, this need to train and to fight and to be the best fighter, rather than fighting for power or personal glory, that sets him apart from the Ryu in the live action movie. In this treatment, he's a grifter, part of a con artist duo with Ken trying to get a score over Sagat. And while, like Ken, he does join the team for the greater good to fight Bison, this is late in the day at the end of the movie and without a clear reason beyond reassessing what mattered to him. And to Ken, we also see distinctly different treatments across the movies. While both set him up as a womanizer and someone seeking his own glory, the animated movie delves deeper into his psyche, like when he fights T-Hawk and laments he needs to fight Ryu again because he is the only fighter who can beat him, and when Bison uses his psycho power to turn Ken's jealousy to Ryu against him. And it's only when Ken is at his lowest, paralyzed by Bison, unable to walk, that he remembers his sensei's teachings, that beyond his fist is not just victory, but his fate. Compare this to the Ken in live action, where the only contribution he provides is a bungled attempt to seduce Chun-Li, or looking for some loot to take as Bison's HQ burns down, before belatedly deciding to save Ryu from Sagat and Vega. And it's with this comparison we also see something thematically different between the movies. If the animated movie is more focused on fights and how they meaningfully evolve the story and characterization, the live action movie wins hands down by using more humour, with 45% of scenes including humour versus just 15% for the animated movie. Now, whether the humour is any good or not is within the eye of the beholder, but what's clear is it's intended in the live action movie and doesn't really fit the video game lore that came before it. And this is no better demonstrated than with its two big stars, Raoul Julia as Bison and Jean-Claude Van Damme as Guile. Julia's performance as Bison turned out to be his last before he sadly passed away, and he really was at his comedic hammy best, completely over the top and stealing the show from the lead star in Van Damme. Like when he gets changed into his smoking jacket and chooses a new hat, but it still is a military general style, or when he talks about his grand plan for a new Shadowloo center of power, yet insists on a franchise food court. And when Chun-Li tells the story of her father saving the village at the cost of his own life, he says it was the most important day of her life, but for him it was a Tuesday. Van Damme's portrayal of Guile also has its moments, like when he says, "What a woman," or it being about his own personal vendetta. It's clearly played for laughs, but because of this, when it comes to his big finale with Bison, at this point it's a battle of two comedians rather than two world warriors. And to the end sequences of each movie, both have multiple fights happening in parallel, with Ken and Ryu taking on Bison and Honda versus Balrog in animated, and Guile taking on Bison with Ryu and Ken versus Sagat and Vega. Yet their meaning and consequence couldn't be more different. In animated, Ryu and Ken team up to beat Bison, and it's only by combining their Hadoukens that they can win. By comparison, in the live action movie, Guile simply spin kicks his way to beating Bison, despite Bison being supercharged with magnetism and having more power than Guile. And Ryu and Ken's fight versus Vega and Sagat is beyond laughable, with the puff of their Hadouken, the blink and you'll miss it Shuriken, and the actor that plays Sagat looks like a stiff breeze would knock him over compared to the towering 7-foot villain in the animated movie. And it's in these different difference is we see two movies with very different motivations. One that adds to the lore with deep characterization, choreographed and meaningful fights that contribute to the story and evolve the characters, and another that gives lip service to a few special moves and tries to compensate for its lack of quality by playing it for laughs. With the only person left laughing, Van Damme, as he ran into the sunset with his paycheck. And while the live action movie made money for the studio, the animated movie made a legacy, one that inspired more animated movies and games, with its animation style forming the basis of the subsequent Alpha games and having an influence on the series to this very day. So with those concluding thoughts, what do you think? Have I got it right that the new movie needs to get back to the style and authenticity of the animated adaptation? Or am I being too hard on the live action movie and you'd like to see another one like this that leans more into humour and one-liners? Drop a like or a comment in the video to let me know. And if you liked what you saw today, please subscribe so we can explore together more examples of video game movie adaptations that added to their lore and those that cashed in on it. And remember, in the way of data and observation, we can save entertainment.